Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. So you might need a little context about today's episode. This conversation is with Jennifer Jordan, an award-winning author, writer, speaker, and most importantly to this conversation, a filmmaker. Jennifer is the woman behind the documentary 3,000 Cups of Tea, The Rise and Ruin of Greg Mortenson. Now, Greg's a name that should probably ring a bell for you. He's the author of 3 Cups of Tea, One Man's Mission to Promote Peace, One School at a Time. The book basically chronicles Greg's transition from working as a nurse in Montana, who has a passion for the mountains, to his work in Pakistan and Afghanistan building schools for girls. I won't go into all the details of the book because there's a good chance that you've already read it, and if not, you definitely should. The paperback version of 3 Cups of Tea came out in 2007, and it was the #1 New York Times bestseller for 3 years. It's now been published in nearly 40 languages, and because of his humanitarian work, Greg co-founded the Central Asia Institute to help further his causes. And to date, they have funded 400 projects in the region, including the building of 300 schools. That's pretty incredible. I read the book shortly after it was published, and I loved it. And I even had the chance to see Greg speak in Seattle many years ago. But it hasn't been all roses for Greg. In April of 2011, 60 Minutes aired a report that was basically a takedown of Greg. Their primary source for the story was Jon Krakauer. Now, you might know Jon Krakauer from several books he's written, including Into Thin Air. In that program, there were numerous allegations waged against Greg, including that he fabricated the building of some of those schools, that he misallocated funds, and that he outright lied about events that were documented in the book. I clearly remember when this happened. As someone who's been on the board of several nonprofits over the past, maybe 25 years or so, I watched this unfold with interest. And I saw that 60 Minutes episode, and I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't question their findings. I just thought, shit, I better make sure that my act is together when it comes to the work I do on these nonprofit boards. I will say that in the back of my mind, I did think about all the schools he built. And though I haven't been to Pakistan or Afghanistan, I've been to enough developing countries to know that education, particularly for girls, is often not high on a priority list, like for a government. So the fact that he was building schools to educate young girls, I knew that that was a great thing. I knew that Krakauer had written his own sort of expose about Greg, and I think that hit like the day after, or got published the day after that 60 Minutes episode aired. And boy, given what you'll hear about Krakauer in this conversation with Jennifer, I feel like I need to choose my words really carefully. But it seems like Krakauer felt taken by Greg after having donated quite a bit of money to the Central Asia Institute. And it seems like something else is going on there that we just don't quite know about. But I don't know. The only thing we can do is really speculate. In any case, it appears that Krakauer was really behind the takedown of Greg in terms of that 60 Minutes piece. And according to Jennifer, he continues to be a threat in terms of allowing Greg's side of the story to be heard. And you'll hear about some of these details in our conversation, but in short, Krakauer has been successful in ensuring that this film doesn't get wide viewership. So that's the backstory. Jennifer lives in Salt Lake City, and I was recently there for Sundance up in Park City. And when a mutual friend offered to introduce us, I jumped at the chance. Having read 3 Cups of Tea and having had some knowledge about Greg and the Central Asia Institute, I was really interested in hearing this other side of the story. And Jennifer was kind enough to give me access to the film prior to our chat, so I knew what I was getting into. While we begin this conversation with Jennifer's background, we do spend quite a bit of time talking about this new documentary, why she made it, how she made it, and her goal in having created it. And as she says, she knows that Greg was not perfect, But the documentary certainly leaves one wondering why the takedown of a man who was and still is doing so much good in the world. It just really is mind-boggling. If this could happen to Greg, it could happen to any of us, and I think that's the really scary thing about it. I'll link to the documentary in the show notes. And just know that 3,000 Cups of Tea is available for purchase or streaming, and it's like $5 to stream it on the website. So please, please, I really hope that you'll take just some time to watch this. It really is amazing and enlightening. As you'll hear in this conversation, Jennifer's had a difficult time getting this into film festivals and theaters. And I'm considering organizing a coordinated effort of home viewing. So, like in my perfect world, there would be, 100 people across the country willing to host an evening for maybe 10 or 20 people where we could get some media attention for it. If you're interested, you can drop me a line at beth@beboldpodcast.com. Before we get into our conversation, just a quick reminder that if you are new to the podcast, I encourage you to go back to previous episodes where I highlight other interesting and courageous women doing extraordinary things. You can find all the episodes at beboldpodcast.com, or you can subscribe wherever you find podcasts such as iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. When you listen to those previous episodes, you'll discover strong women who have overcome adversity. They've started businesses, they've challenged themselves in a variety of ways, they've traveled the world, attained status as world-class athletes, and given up secure jobs to pursue their dreams and passions. And really, that is so much what Jennifer is all about, as you will hear. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with a very courageous woman, Jennifer Jordan.
I took the first job offered, which was typing in a radio station, and within, I think, 6 months, my boss said to me, "You're not here to type. What do you want to do?" Because she said, "I don't want to lose you because you are a good typist and a good secretary." So I said, "Well, I'd like my own talk show." And bless her heart, she gave it to me.
What did you talk about?
22 years old. Everything. Everything. It was... the beauty of it was I was in Boston, so I was interviewing presidential candidates and, Stephen King and James Taylor and...
I bet that was heaven for a 22-year-old.
22-year-old. It was fantastic. I loved it.
My background is in radio, too. I went to college for radio, but I was going to be I grew up on the East Coast, and I was going to be a famous disc jockey in New York City. Until I realized after I got out of college, it's like you make $6 an hour, just spinning at the local AM or FM, small FM radio station.
Right.
And
where'd you grow up back east?
In New Jersey.
Where?
Mahwah, which is in Bergen County. It's near Paramus, which everyone knows the Paramus Park Mall.
Yeah. Because my mother grew up in Maplewood.
Oh, okay. My brother lives near there. Very close.
Yeah. And she went to nursing school at Orange Memorial Hospital. How do I remember that? Yep, small world.
And I love it. I love being back on the podcast because it's a natural for me. It brings me right back to that, so it's fun. So I get to pretend I'm a rock and roll back in my rock and roll days. Yeah. So, gosh, so many things to talk about for sure. You are a woman who wears a lot of hats, it seems. Maybe you view it a little bit differently, but when I read about you, it seems you have had your hand on a lot of different projects over the years. What would you, if someone asked you, elevator speech, what do you do, Jennifer?
Right now, I write books.
You do? What are you working on?
I'm working on a memoir. I've been hired as a ghostwriter to write another woman's memoir. And I found the ghostwriting when I was working on the 3,000 Cups of Tea and called my agent after not having literally had a dime come through the door in 2.5, 3 years and said, "Find me something, find me anything." And she said, "Well, I don't know if you're going to be interested, but this woman needs somebody to write her book."
And are you able to talk about who that is, or is that the whole idea behind being a ghostwriter is you're behind the scenes?
Every project is different. The first book is called Perfect Strangers. That's ice falling off our roof.
Yeah.
Perfect Strangers. And I wrote it with Roseanne Stoya, who was one of the women who lost a leg in the Boston Marathon bombing. And the second book I cannot discuss. It's coming out in October, and I can't discuss it because this is one in which the marketing world needs to think she wrote the book. But anyway, long story short, I find that I love ghostwriting because it brings all of my skills as an interviewer, as a researcher, and as kind of a Gladys Kravitz snoop. I love getting into somebody else's life and meeting all the characters and putting the pieces together and solving the puzzles and then making a story out of it.
I'm working on a book. I've written a couple of books, all more like how-to travel books, but I'm working on more of a memoir right now. Maybe I should just hand it over to you. Because I'm dragging with it. It's taken me a long time to carve out that time. As writers have that problem, it's taken me a long time to sit down and carve it out and carve out the time and sit down and write. It's just a lot. So right now you're a writer. You're most well. Let's talk about where you grew up because we talked about the East Coast. Did you grow up on the East Coast?
I did. I grew up in Vermont, and I went to college in Amherst, UMass Amherst. Upon graduation, I traveled to the Far East with my sister. I actually
Where in the Far East?
She was in the Peace Corps in South Korea. And so I got a waitressing job in the Grand Canyon to get the money together. And then once I'd banked $8,000, and this is, of course, back
that's a lot of money.
In 1980, thank you very much.
Well, that's a lot of money just for travel, too.
Right.
Because probably traveled to South Korea, then you probably needed $1,000 and you'd get by it for 6 months.
Right. No, I should have been a banker or a hedge funder because I'm very good with money. Thank goodness, right? Because filmmaking is not exactly a lucrative business. So in any case, met her and flew over to South Korea, met her, and then she and I did, the entire peninsula of Korea, and then we went to, what was our first stop? Then Burma and Hong Kong and Thailand and Singapore.
You were backpacking?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How old were you?
What year was it? 21, 22? 22, right after college. And then 1980, 22. So then we were, I think, floating in the seas of, off of Bali or something. And we looked at each other and said, kind of had enough of the third world Indonesian scene. Let's go to Australia.
That's where your $8,000 went.
Yeah. So flew into Australia and did that entire continent, top to bottom, east to west. And then New Zealand, and then kind of puddle jumped our way home through Tahiti and
How long
Namibia.
were you traveling?
About 8 months.
I took 1992 and traveled for a year. Very similarly, it was back then you could get what was called a Circle the Pacific ticket.
Ooh.
And so from Seattle, then you could get, it was an open-ended ticket with specific spots. So it was Bangkok, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and home for me. So you got to do that thing. It sounds very similar to what you did. Those were the good old days, weren't they?
They were indeed.
Do you ever think of doing something like that again? Taking off for maybe 3 months?
I feel like the expeditions to K2 were exactly that. I mean, the first expedition to K2 was actually closer to 4 months. The second one was 3 months. But as far as that kind of backpacky shoestring, I'd rather, if I can't go with my sister, I don't really want to go because she and I are wonderful travel companions, and that would be wonderful to spend that kind of quality time together again.
Are you married?
Yes.
Okay, so would your husband do travel like that?
Well, again, we did the K2 trips together, and it was wonderful. But I'd rather do it with my sister. I think.
Okay. Well, Jeff, it is right. Yeah. Okay. Well, we won't tell
Jeff. He would understand. He would understand.
Okay.
We travel well together as well, but there's just something, as you know, very special about traveling with another woman and with a woman you've known every single minute of your entire life.
Now, that feeling I don't know. I grew up with 3 brothers.
Oh, okay.
So that I don't know, but it does sound great. Yeah. And you're super clear about it, and Jeff's good with it. So, yeah. We'll find you in Asia or somewhere.
Right.
At some point. So grew up in Vermont, you said, went to school at UMass. Was it? Then what was your career move right after, your first career move, I guess?
Well, I moved to Boston. where I had a friend from college who had a room in an apartment that she was renting. So got home from Asia, moved in with her and the other roommate, and just started pounding the pavement. I hadn't done anything right as far as doing the internships during college.
What was your major?
I had double major of Middle East history and journalism. So I envisioned myself as a foreign correspondent at one point because I went to high school in Egypt. So I just fell in love with the Arabic culture and language. And
For all of your high school, you went to you
no,
were in
just
Egypt
the last year.
with your family?
With my mother, who is another, wanderlust spirit. She left. My parents divorced, and she said, "I'm out of Vermont. I can't do another winter in this godforsaken place." So I was still at home in high school. So she found a job in Egypt, and so I spent what were supposed to be my junior and senior years in Egypt, but it ended up being just my junior combined with senior year. So I graduated high school in 3 years over there.
What was that like? Like that's a huge switch, and that can either mess you up for the rest of your life, but it doesn't sound like it did that for
No,
you. You embraced that.
It was interesting. I was a terrible snit as a teenager, just angry and moody and,
Weren't we all?
Oh, God.
That's what I tell myself.
The pictures my mother used to say, just wait until you're a mother. And I think it's probably one of the reasons I never became one. Just thinking, oh, my God, the retribution is going to be bad. So when I got over there with her, and of course our mothers are our primary target when we're in a teenage snit, right? I got over there with her, and the beginning was so difficult, as you say, from Charlotte, Vermont to Alexandria, Egypt, within a day and a half, and just immersed in this school and this culture. And the school was in a ghetto neighborhood, a very poor neighborhood of Alexandria. So we just looked at each other wide-eyed going, what have we done? And yet we literally embraced, and within a moment I was over my snit. And neither of us is the type to get back on an airplane and go home. So
she became your ally.
Exactly. And my friend. And it's been that way ever since. So it was a magical year. I mean, I remember driving when we got picked up at the Cairo airport, which I haven't been back to Cairo since, but I can imagine the mayhem of that airport's probably very similar. The school people finally found us, and mind you, we'd been traveling 36, 40 hours or something, and we were more dead than alive. And we got in the car, and our heads were like knocking against each other in the back seat, nodding out, driving from Cairo up to Alexandria. And all of a sudden, the car stopped, and I thought, oh, God, I know we're not there yet, because I knew it was at least a 2 or 3 hour drive. And the principal of the school who picked us up said, look out the window. So I kind of, rolling my 14-year-old eyes and look out, and there we are at the pyramids. Under a full moon.
Oh, my gosh.
And he knew what magic that would be. And we got out of the car and just and in those days, there was nothing around the pyramids. Now it's all hotels and kiosks and, casinos. And then it was just the pyramids. And it was magical. And that allowed me to kind of, the inner voice saying, all right, just get over yourself. Because this is a once in a lifetime. And it was.
So you were aware enough about that.
I was.
So you finished up your high school there, and then you came back to the U.S.?
I came back to the U.S. and
did your travel?
Well, actually, because I had an extra year. I mean, I had just turned 17, just turned 16 or 17 when I graduated from high school, and I knew I didn't want to go to college yet. So I ended up going to forestry school up in northern Vermont. I had done an outward bound program there during high school. And in the meantime, they had developed into a 1-year forestry and agricultural certification program. So I went to that, and it ended up, again, being this amazing, just transitional, transcendent year for me.
Where was that?
Craftsbury Common, Vermont, Sterling College. And I am, to this day, I mean, in love with the place. I was a trustee for several years until I moved out here, actually. And they will always be in my heart and in my will.
Yeah,
It's
I'm fairly
it's a
certain.
special place.
I'm fairly certain I've been there. I have a friend who went to forestry school up there, and I remember on a trip that I was taking around the country, I stopped. That was one of my last stops, and I just remember it was December, and it was just magical white, and it was just small college, right? Small
Tiny.
and oh yeah.
Yet white clapboard houses and black shutters, and on Craftsbury Common is one of the, those old not even turn of the century, I mean turn of the 17th century villages that has remained for all intents and purposes untouched. I mean, they of course have electricity, but there's just not a lot of evidence of the world beyond.
That sounds heavenly.
And Sterling is an all but self-sustaining school with solar and wind and their own farm and their own, slaughterhouse.
Oh,
and their
the memories
own,
are coming back. Yeah.
It is, and they have an environmental program that really rivals the largest and best in the country as far as putting its students out into the world to make the world a better place. So Sterling College, Craftsbury Common, look it up. It's magical. And so after I graduated from there, then I went on to college and got my BA, and then
traveled
Asia, and then Boston, and typing in a radio station. The first job offered to me. And within 6 months, my boss, a woman, came to me and said, "You're not here to type, but I don't want to lose you as a typist. So what do you want to do here that will keep you here?" And I, in my very ballsy 22 years, said, I think I'd be a good talk show host. And she agreed that I could talk and said, "Okay, we'll give you the graveyard shift. And if you don't do too much damage, then the FCC won't come after us." And within months, I had, the show was primetime Sunday public affairs programming, and by the time I left, I was the news director and the public affairs director.
How long were you there?
I think 3 years, and then I went off and did the program on my own and self-syndicated it through, and I don't even know if NPR still has this, but at that point, National Public Radio had a satellite distribution service that you could basically buy time and distribute your program. You had to do all the marketing and all, which I did. And so I put it out there and then had my little notebook of the 200 stations I'd call every single Monday morning telling them what the Friday program was. And it went nationwide. And I did that as long as I could. And then I just was having a hard time paying the rent in Boston.
Yeah, as I said, $6 an hour, right?
So ended up directing an incredible lecture program at Harvard called The Forum, in what was then the Arco Forum, now the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, at the Kennedy School of Government. And did that for several years, and blah, on and on and on.
Yeah, lots of interesting things there.
As you say, a lot of hats. I mean, when I recount it, it's like, ooh, geez, I have been a bit of a.
And so you've written books over the years, and then how did K2 and how did Pakistan and Afghanistan come into play for you?
After I left Harvard, got back into radio, and I worked at WGBH in Boston in radio and their television as a spot reporter and contributor for one of their news magazines. And after the Into Thin Air year in 1996, David Brashears, who was a filmmaker, he did the IMAX Everest film. He was filming it in 96 on the mountain when the tragedy hit. And so I knew he was back on the mountain in 97. So I produced a segment to interview him. I contacted him at base camp, and he said, "Okay, when we get back, we'll come and give you, WGBH, first dibs on our footage," because they were doing this experimental research up there on the mountain on high altitude physiology. So I had the whole piece produced and literally waiting for David's flight to get in from Kathmandu to bring him right to the studio, and was told by the producer that the host of the program wanted the segment and was going to take it. And I, of course, said, well, you can't. It's my segment. And he said, yes, we can. It's her show. So I said, well, all right, how to make lemonade out of this? Because I was so angry. And I thought,
I was going to say, did you say that nicely to yourself? How to make lemonade out of this?
It wasn't the exact words I used. No, Beth, not exactly the right words. So I contacted one of the magazines in Boston, and I wrote it ended up being my first cover story. The David Brashear's profile.
Could you have done that otherwise if you had the major story at your station?
Well, I don't think I would have had the access that I did to David and to all the other characters in the story if I had called and said, well, I'm thinking about doing this piece for I don't know what. That doesn't hold as much power as saying, I'm producing a piece for WGBH. Will you talk to me? So with all of the groundwork of the powerhouse of GBH behind me.
And you wouldn't have gone to the magazine had you not lost it as part of the station thing
absolutely would not have.
So,
and the magazine wouldn't have known who I was or cared. The fact that I was working for WGBH and had already done all the work, already done the interviews, So anyway, so that ended up being my first cover story, and I wrote a series of magazine articles while in Boston and still working at GBH. In the process of that, I came across this, and of course, the Into Thin Air and the mountaineering. I was fascinated by high altitude climbing. I'm from Vermont. For goodness sakes, a high mountain is 5,000 feet. And I just, as an addictive athlete, I understood the mindset of somebody that goes to a place called the death zone and kind of, thumbs their nose at death. And so in the process of that, I was interviewing. I'm trying to think about what got me to the women's story. Oh, I was going through a book on mountaineering and statistics, and I saw that every single one of only 5 women had climbed K2, and all of them were dead. I thought, wait a minute, how's that happen? I mean, K2 is the second highest mountain.
They died on K2?
3 of them died on K2. The 2 that made it off alive after their ascent were killed on other 8,000 meter peaks. So they all died climbing, and they all died in the 8,000 meter Himalayas. And so I followed the story. And, as a woman, as an athlete, as a journalist, thought, I really want to know what's happened here and why these women all perished. So that ended up being my first book. It also ended up being my first documentary, Women of K2.
And the book is of the same name?
No, the book is called Savage Summit, and the film, the National Geographic film, is called Women of K2.
Okay, I'll link to both of those in the show notes, too,
okay,
so
great.
People can find that.
Great.
So you had the book and the documentary that were out, and what did you discover? Just can you tell us just a little bit so that we don't have to wait until we see the documentary or read the book, but what did you discover that why had these women died?
They died, the big answer is because they were on the second deadliest mountain in the world. A lot of people die, men and women. They also died because they were climbing without supplemental oxygen. The women that have 13 women have subsequently climbed K2 since the first 5 that I researched and did the work on. Each of them has survived their descent because each of them used oxygen on the way down.
Is it unusual to not have oxygen on K2?
Not in the early days. In the early days, it was prohibitively expensive to bring it in, and also almost impossible to get visas for the Darjeeling Sherpas that were needed to get it up there, because Pakistani porters are not as strong or as gifted a climber as the Sherpas are. But Pakistan doesn't want to issue visas because they want their locals to be hired. So all those reasons. K2 is also 900 miles north and west of Everest. So it has a much colder climbing season than Everest does. It is also prohibitively steep. Everest, when you look at the topography, the climbers are really on a glacier between 2 mountains for a lot of the climb, right up until the yellow band below Camp 3. So you've got all that pretty casual, except for the ice fall, but pretty casual walking up a big comb. And then you get to your real climb of the Yellow Band and the South Col, and then, the last few thousand feet to the summit. K2 is a full-on ice axe, crampon, rope, safety harness from the moment you leave base camp. From the moment you leave that glacier at the foot of the mountain, you are on a serious full-on climb, 12,000 feet of full-on ice fall and rock fall and avalanche danger and exhaustion. And as Jeff was telling an audience the other night when we had a presentation here, that on Everest, because he's climbed Everest twice, there are many, many, many areas where you can rest and you can chill and you can sit and enjoy a cup of tea and take a nap and spend a day or two. There is nothing like that on K2.
And not that Everest is easy.
No.
But K2, your point is that K2 is immensely more difficult.
Immensely more difficult.
Do you know what the ratio is of men to women on who attempt to climb K2?
The Himalayan climbing population has almost to a number remained 5% women.
No kidding.
From the earliest days until today. It's a very interesting statistic in that it doesn't really change.
I didn't realize it was so low.
Yeah, only 5%. And yet, and the women, I'm trying to think how many women have died to this day on K2 and if it's 5% of the population. But basically, it's...
Do you know if that's a physiological thing strictly, or is it just like 3 to 5% of airplane pilots are women? Is it an economical thing? Are there a lot of things that play a factor in it, or do you really think that there's a strong physiological aspect to it?
No, just the opposite. Physiologically, women are much stronger at altitude.
Oh, encouraging.
Because our bodies are geared to survival. Our bodies, you look at all the different mechanisms that we have to protect the womb. They also protect us at altitude. It's about retaining our fat, which we don't like a lot, but we retain our fat better, which keeps you alive longer at altitude. We acclimatize better. We oxygenate better. We have, and I don't know the statistics on this because, of course, women are so under-researched, but I would like to know if women suffer frostbite less, because I think they do. The women of K2 certainly did. Not one woman of K2 lost so much as a pinky to frostbite. We just have better circulation.
You have another theory about women.
I have a lot of theories.
Yeah, I want to hear the Jennifer Jordan theory that I read online, so it must be true, about women and men at altitude and how men just respond differently at altitude. Do you know what I'm referring to?
It's funny. It's in the book. It's in Savage Summit, and my theory is based in observation.
Yeah. Okay. Noted.
About watching how men react to altitude. And altitude at base camp is 17,500 feet. So we're not talking at the top of one of these 8,000 meter peaks. But they go through really their first PMS, I think. This is my theory. This is the Jennifer Jordan theory. They go through an emotional shift that they're totally unprepared for. We women get it. It happens, monthly from the time we're 12 until we're 52. We get it. And men, the men that I have witnessed, and it's been scores of men that I've witnessed, freak out. And, they throw tantrums because they have to eat potatoes again. And they cry when they get emails from their mother. And their emotionality, altitude does create an emotionality. So that's just fact. We women figure it out. And we might tear up and we feel a little more frustrated because, we can't get the jar open, but we deal with it. But for men, it's just this freaking out, this what is going on that I've noticed. And I called NASA at one point in my research with Savage Summit, And I said, might you want to do some research about the difference between men and women at altitude, because you are putting men and women now together in the same little capsule for months at a time. And if women are better geared to it, that's one thing. But if there's something you can do to help men figure this out so they don't freak out in the stratosphere.
Was that accepted by NASA?
It was a typical brush off. Oh, well, that's a very interesting theory, Miss Jordan. We'll look into it. I have no idea if they have. Right.
Meanwhile, there's somebody going, "Oh my God, what a great idea that is. Let's go check it out, but don't tell her."
Right.
It's all hush hush. Yeah. I do love that. I think that's interesting. I haven't spent enough time at that kind of altitude to know for sure, but it certainly, I guess it makes sense.
No, it's definitely the oxygen deprivation does a gamut of things to our psyches.
And women too, for sure.
Right.
Because I have seen that. I have seen it amongst men and women at altitude just have meltdowns. Mm-hmm. Inexplicable meltdowns for sure.
Base camp is definitely a high altitude Peyton place. I'm dating myself with that reference, but there's a lot of stuff and crap that goes on. You just shake your head. It's just that kind of the combination of wild, wild west, that you are off the grid in every single way possible.
And extremely harsh circumstances.
Extremely harsh, especially at K2. It's not, Everest Base Camp is a bacchanal compared to K2. Pizza and beer and disco nights and just...
No kidding.
Oh, yeah. No, people now bring, they bring tents that are not, well, we all have large tents for the common areas, but they also bring flooring and Persian carpets and chaise lounges and big screen TVs. I mean, it's a very, very, it's now glamming. And what do they call it?
Glamping.
Glamping. Yeah. It's unbelievable what's happened to Everest. Not so much K2 yet, because it's a much different approach and longer, harder, rugged. I can't imagine the money it would take to helicopter in the flooring and the Persian carpets, but I suppose it's coming.
Yeah, crazy. So you got interested. You had read Into Thin Air. You got interested in David Brashears, interested in that part of the world. And then what made you decide just to take off and go travel there yourself?
Well, when I started researching this phenomenon of women on K2 and what the hell's happening and why did they all die? How did they all die? I knew 5 women climbed Everest in a day. What was so different about K2? So in my research, I found an American woman. Her name is Heidi Hawkins. She was aiming to go to K2 and become the first American woman to climb the mountain. And so in the course of my interviewing her, she said, well, do you want to come along? And it was one of those moments where I put my hand over the receiver and was like,
how can you say no?
Exactly. How can you say no? How could I purport to write a book on these women of K2 and not go there myself and not see the mountain? I mean, I knew I never wanted to climb it, but not have the experience to not. So I went.
So what is that like? Because I think it's fairly well documented, and a lot of people have a good sense of what happens when you go to Everest Base Camp. In terms of flying into Kathmandu, maybe getting transported to another location and then hiking up, and that taking, weeks of your time to get to base camp. What is it like for K2? Like you fly into where, and then you're trekking from day one, or how does that work?
How much time do you have, Beth? You fly into Islamabad and you spend shy of a week, but several days staging, getting permits, getting foodstuffs.
What's the altitude there?
Islamabad's low. Islamabad's, I don't know, maybe 1,000 feet, but it's hot because you're flying in late May, early June. And the first expedition was to the north side of K2. So we spent, from the time I left Boston to the time I set up my tent at base camp, 1 month getting in, just because once you're into China, you've got to go from Islamabad up over the Kunjarab Pass into China and then back down, up through to Kashgar, I think was our northern city, and then straight south into the mountains to the north side of K2.
And you have no problems getting visas into China?
Lots of problems. Yep. Thank you very much. Lots of problems and we were stopped at the last outpost before we hit the true mountains, getting in at a military outpost. And they stopped us because they could. And they held us because they could. And, we had 18 people and 300 duffels, and they went through every single one every single day because they could. They were bored. They had nothing else to do. And the only reason we finally got out of there is because several of the men on the team, Jeff included, started to play basketball with them. And so we struck up a friendship.
Yeah, you make friends with them. Mm-hmm.
With these Chinese boys with the AR-47s across their chests. And that was it. Suddenly they signed the papers and on we went. So I'm struggling for words because the trek in on both sides is as arduous and as painful and as demoralizing and as relentless and as anything I've ever experienced in my life. And it was, day after day, week after week, and you finally get to base camp. And
so you've spent a week in Islamabad. Mm-hmm. Is it then 3 weeks of trekking getting to base camp?
It's on the north, getting into the north side. It was another week to 10 days of road travel. And then it was, once we were dumped in the dust and, by the last of when the road literally ends and we pick up our backpacks and go, that trek in, once on our feet, again, 3 to 4 weeks. But, and that's another thing. So you get to the mountain and then something called the camel dump, because camels have to bring you across the Shanksgam River because it's this effluvium, glacial effluvium that will take you and kill you. And then you have to, from the camel dump, then we had to carry the gear because the camels and the porters left up, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, getting this tonnage the next 12 miles. I think it was 6, but 12 round trip. So that was the north side. North side was... Oof.
And then what's at that 12 miles?
The base camp, the true base camp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was that, how long did it take you to do that?
All day.
To leapfrog?
Oh.
For those 12 miles?
It would take all day. You would do the back and forth in a day.
Well, that's not too bad then.
So you'd go down for a load and then take the load back to base camp. So you'd go down empty and load up from the camel dump and carry it up to base camp.
But not 12 miles one way?
No. Yeah, I think it was 6 one way.
Okay.
Yeah, it couldn't have been 24. Yeah. I remember 12 miles, so it must have been 6 and 6. And the kind of, every single footfall, because you're on a glacier, is unsure because the ice underneath the rock is melting out as the day goes on. So, I still have scar tissue in both my ankles from just the constant rolling and spraining. The south side is somewhat easier in that you leave Islamabad, you drive for, how many nights were on the road? Chilas, Soest. I think we were on the road for 3 nights. And then you get to a place called Ascoli, which is the end of that road. And then you're trekking in another 70 miles. So another week because the porters, Sherpas, teams know not to gain any more than 1,000 feet of altitude in a day just to acclimatize properly. So that trek on your feet, once you're through all the roads, is, I believe, about a week.
And you've been twice?
Yeah.
Okay.
North and south sides. In fact, I'm probably the only person in the history of all of this that has been to both sides of K2 with no intention of climbing either.
And you're good with that, right?
Believe me, you take one look at that mountain when you're in its proximity, and you just get on your hands and knees and thank Jesus, good Lord, that you don't have to climb it.
Would you recommend that kind of trip for someone?
Yes.
I mean, because I was say lots of people do base camp
It's an
Everest.
amazing. I wouldn't recommend the north side. That's a little too long and a little too, especially now with the Chinese. There's just too many variables. But the south side trek, and I have a great friend over there I can recommend to guide, because you have to have a guide and a liaison. But it is, you're in what Galen Rowell called the throne room of the mountain gods. There are 40 6, and 7, and 8,000 meter peaks right that you're walking between. And some of the most beautiful, G4, K2, Chogalisa. I mean, these peaks.
Are they're all snowed in? Your walk is completely snow. Mm-hmm.
Your walk, once you get to the glacier, your walk is completely snow, ice and snow. But before the glacier, you're in grass and rivers and
we should say, we'll just go back and say for listeners that Galen Rowell was an amazing photographer who did a lot of work in that area, and he and his wife perished in a small plane crash a number of years ago. I remember that.
And he was on the Americans' 1978 expedition in which they made the first American ascent of the mountain. And there's a beautiful photographic book, coffee table book, called Throne Room of the Mountain Gods.
From Galen.
Yeah, Galen did.
I'll take a look at it. I know I'm very familiar with his work from Tibet, of the Patala, and I think he has an iconic image of the Patala with a rainbow coming down on the palace. Is just really gorgeous. So, yeah. So let's move kind of quickly through what you've done, and we're going to fast forward a little bit, to your most recent project. And how that came about, and how we got connected too. So is through a mutual friend who told me about your documentary 3,000 Cups of Tea, which is, and I can't recall if there's a subtitle, but basically it's the rise and ruin of Greg Mortenson. Yes, thank you. I knew you would know that for some reason, just off the top of your head. Let's talk about that. How did you get interested in Greg? And again, for listeners, this is directly most people will remember 3 Cups of Tea, the phenom of a book that came out, really grand bestseller 8 to 10 years ago.
2006.
Okay, 2006 it came out, was a huge success. And you can tell the story better than I can about kind of what happened to him. And then if you could explain your involvement with that.
I met Greg in 2000 on my first expedition to K2. He came to the hotel to help our team with the really tricky logistics of getting in through the Northwest Territories of Pakistan. And I was really taken with him because he was, and I say this in the film, you could just tell he was a man who could get things done. And he was also one of the most quietly, humbly competent people I'd ever met. Like, there was no bravado, there was no I'll show you the way, or I've been here in Pakistan for X amount of years and I know there was none of that. It was all, well, maybe I can help you with this guy, and I know this guy here, so, give him a call. But none of the tell him I called and make sure that I get, what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that struck me. And then 2 years later, when Jeff and I were invited back to K2 to follow a Spanish woman, Araceli Segarra, who had been on the Everest IMAX with David in 96. She invited Jeff to be part of her team trying to attempt the mountain. And I again called Greg because it had been just a few, I think, weeks after 9/11. And I said, are we crazy to think that we can get into K2? And once again, he helped us. And once again said, Pakistan is not your danger. K2 is your danger. Just remember that. It's the mountain, not the people that will get you there. So I was, fast forward, the book came out. So I followed his career. I interviewed him after 9/11. He came through Salt Lake. I didn't see him on that second trip to Pakistan. He was up in the mountains at the time. And I followed his trajectory of a career and thought, saw the book come out and thought, good on you, Greg. 4 million copies and 49 languages. And the U.S. military giving it to its incoming troops as kind of a tool for understanding the culture. And then in April of 2011, I saw that 60 Minutes was doing a piece on him. And I knew from the PR that was released the Saturday before the Sunday that it was going to be a takedown. And I watched the piece, and it was one of those moments where you just, I kept thinking about Greg and thinking about what he must be going through watching it. Little did I know that he didn't watch it for months. And I thought, no matter if this is true or false, or no matter how much validity or how much nefarious activity has gone on with this report, this is going to be his epitaph. This is going to be in this man's obituary. And that just broke my heart. Knowing him as I did and seeing his incredible good work on the ground. And then in watching the piece, I saw that John Krakauer was 60 Minutes primary, and some have told me prime, and real only source. And I thought, I'm going to do my own research into this because I just don't trust it. I had learned too much about what John didn't write about in Into Thin Air, and what he didn't write about in Under the Banner of Heaven, and what he didn't write about in Into the Wild, to know that there was a lot of this story that was missing. So I did my own research, and I found that contrary to the 60 Minutes piece, every school we visited existed, number one. Number two, was full of children. Number three, these children spoke to us in 3 different languages, including greeting us and singing to us in English. I don't know how many schools you've been to in the United States where they greet you in Urdu and Pashto, but not too often.
And in the 60 Minutes piece, they said that when they had visited, there was no one at the school.
Right.
Is that right?
They said
at some of the schools.
They said they visited 30 schools, and while some of them were functioning, and I'm paraphrasing here, many were either empty, abandoned, and the list of adjectives goes on, all by way of saying they painted a picture of fraud and lies and misuse of the public trust.
But what they left out was...
number one, when I went over to Islamabad and interviewed the CBS bureau chief in Islamabad, a woman named Maria Usman, and I asked her for the list of those schools, because if there are 30 schools that aren't functioning, I'd like to know about it. Oh, we'll get you the list. I don't need to tell you, I never saw the list. She also said bold, just outright lied to me. And I've done thousands of interviews, and to be lied to that boldly just shocked me. I felt like a college kid going, really? Wow. I was gobsmacked. And the biggest lie she told me was that she and her crew had gone to Corfe, the village at the end of the road. And I went to Corfe.
And that was the village where Greg apparently stumbled into, right, after having been lost. And he stumbled into this village, and that's what kind of spurred on the whole desire to create these schools.
Right. He was more dead than alive and lost, and he stumbled into Corfe, and the villagers helped him and, brought him into a hut and covered him with a blanket, gave him tea, gave him food, let him rest, let him regroup, and sent out the word that an American was lost on the wrong side of the river. And so the word went out, and his American team came and got him and brought him back across the river, and on their way they went. But Greg remembered their kindness and returned. I think it took him 2 years to get the money to come back, and that's where he built his first school. So 60 Minutes, the report said, the people that we interviewed said that Greg never went there in 93 when Greg was there. Greg never went there when he says he did, and he may have built his first school there, but the story as written in the book is full of holes. And, part of me wanted to say, well, so what? who cares if the story is full of holes? Does the school exist? That should be the only thing that really matters in any case. So we did our own research. We actually found the now men, but then young boys who saw Greg coming over the bridge and took him to the village elder's hut. And so it was just, it broke my heart. And I continued with the research and decided that it deserved a documentary.
Gosh, where to start in terms of that? So I saw the documentary and loved it, and
Thank
it
you.
broke my heart. I mean, that's literally, that's literally how I felt. I wanted to throw up. His story, of course, I loved the book, and I remember that period of time very well because as a traveler, you eat that kind of thing up because it's such a feel-good story. So I loved the book. And I've also been involved with nonprofits for a good bit of my life, at least for the last 30 years, I guess. I've been involved with nonprofits. And I remember when the story broke that there was something that had gone on that wasn't quite right. The 60 Minutes story broke. And I was part of a nonprofit at that time. And I remember it was a small group of us. We thought, gosh, we really have to get our ducks in a row. We have to make sure that everything's fine with our nonprofit because this is what can happen and kind of what people are looking at. And they have this Greg Mortenson thing on their minds now. There's some suspicion around it. So the story stuck with me at that time. And then, I hadn't really heard much over the years. And then to see this documentary and then just be reminded that, he's a guy, he's a human being, and he did these amazing things. He built these schools. And what was the total number of schools?
There are 400 projects, 300 of which are schools spread across 3 countries, right. And 3 of the most fractious, dangerous countries in the world.
Right. So 300 schools. Let's just look at that.
Right.
He's done an amazing work. And in this day and age of social media and shaming and how people just jump on a bandwagon just en masse, is so sad and really frightening because it makes other people potentially stop what they might want to do or create for fear of that happening to them. So I think there's that piece of it. But then to see this film and just see the human side of him, that part is really the heartbreaking part of it, and how that ultimately affects the beneficiaries, the children that do benefit and could potentially benefit down the road.
Well, it's Tara, his wife, in the film says that a lot of people look at this and they say, gosh, if they can take somebody down like a Greg Mortenson, what the hell could happen to me?
Exactly.
And I think that, as you say, it is a terrible, chilling effect on would-be leaders, on would-be heroes, on would-be solvers of the so many problems that we have in this world, because they might have a skeleton. Who doesn't? They might have something they don't want splashed across the tabloids and Facebook and Twitter, and it doesn't even matter if it's true anymore.
Right.
It doesn't even matter. You can make it up and get it out there, and if it's repeated enough times, it becomes some kind of odd Orwellian truth.
So the conclusion in your documentary, 3,000 Cups of Tea, is that, Greg's a human guy, probably made some mistakes along the way.
Definitely made some mistakes. He owns those mistakes.
Right. But did far more good than harm in the process of it.
And it's not only that, Beth. I mean, being on the ground with him in Pakistan and Afghanistan and traveling to these schools and watching these children, most of them boys, because, unfortunately, as much as Greg has done to get the girls educated, there's still a real divide. And the boys are just so much more outgoing. So you get into a village and you're surrounded by the villagers and the children. And they're looking at Greg, who's greeting each and every one of them with a handshake. Every child, every elder, every mother, every single person with a handshake and what's your name? My name's Greg. Hundreds of times in every village. And you look and you say, by God, not one of them is, I shouldn't be so black and white. The chances of one of those children picking up a gun to do harm to America is reduced by a factor of we don't even know, because of this one man, that this is their face of America. A man who came to their village and built them a school, gave them uniforms, trained their teachers, and then left. Didn't even put his name on it. 400 projects and 300 schools later, that's their face of America. It's not the drones. It's not the bombs. It's not the helicopters and the touchdown visits. It's the man who comes and sits in the dirt and drinks that tea and builds them a school. And that is what really broke my heart. The damage that this piece did to that mission. It's still out there. It's still surviving, but it is so wounded by this lasting, reputation of, oh, well, I heard there was fraud.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what happened, like with that 60 Minutes piece, that they were able to air that, and they've aired it 3 times, we know, that they were able to air that with so much false information. And why did they do that? And I believe you would say that John Krakauer was quite a bit behind that process. Why?
Well, we all know 60 Minutes has made some huge errors, reporting errors in the past, the recent past, Benghazi being a huge one. I cannot answer for their motivations about why they did it. I can only try to answer the why they got away with it. And the why they got away with it was Krakauer's very good at choosing his victims. And he knew that Greg does not have the personality to fight back. And so he knew Greg would fold, and Greg did. Greg went right down to his knees.
Literally with a heart bypass. Weeks later.
And there was that. There was that too. I mean, Krakauer kind of belittled Greg's medical issues, saying, well, he could have spoken and done this interview. He could have done this. He could have done that. But yes, Greg had open heart surgery as soon as he was strong enough to withstand it after the scandal. It was sweeps week. They're an $800 billion corporation. They have, 2 or 3 floors of attorneys to intimidate people like me. Getting away with it is not something that CBS worried about, I don't think. I do know that, well, I don't say no because I wasn't in the room, but my sources tell me that when the producers gathered, as evidently they do every Thursday to watch Sunday's show, the producers, the executive producers, the host, the Jeff Fagger, the executive director of 60 Minutes and vice president of CBS News at that point, gathered to watch that Sunday show. After the Greg Mortenson segment, they all looked at each other like, really? We're going to go with this on Sunday? We haven't heard one voice of defense. Why aren't we waiting to get somebody from the board? Why aren't we waiting to get to Greg? Why aren't we talking to somebody in one of those 300 schools that will say what a great thing he's done? But they didn't. They say they talked to scores of people, but not one voice of defense? What kind of journalism is that? I mean, the ad nauseum times I've had to watch that piece, every time I watch it, that to me, as a journalist of 35 years, is the thing that really just makes my blood boil.
When you look at other 60 Minutes segments, do you get that same impression?
I get the impression that many of their pieces are agenda-driven, yes. Many of them, and that was another thing about watching the 60 Minutes piece on Greg. I have edited enough pieces. I've edited enough radio shows and television shows and books, for that matter, and articles to know how easy it is to manipulate a story with editing. And I watched the way they showed their interviews and they showed the footage in the schools, and it just felt manipulated to me. It just felt like they were choosing the worst they could find.
Sounds like a Michael Moore movie.
Yeah, the worst they could find, and as you saw in the film, when they say, Greg canceled, after we approached Greg at his book signing, he fled. He fled the hotel and he canceled his afternoon appearance. And then they show a man leaving the hotel and you realize it's not even Greg Mortenson. I mean, that is just smarmy, cheap journalism. And for 60 Minutes to do it, 60 Minutes is one of the reasons I'm a journalist. I grew up on 60 Minutes as the gold standard to achieve, to strive for. And to see them reduce themselves to a tabloid like that.
What's the agenda behind John Krakauer? So he played a prominent role in your documentary, and I just don't understand what his beef was.
I don't either, because he not only did he refuse to be interviewed by me, but he threatened me at the end of a long back and forth of, I will only do it if you agree. No, he didn't even say I'll agree to do it, but, I need all of this address and all these answers and all this from you before I'll even think about submitting myself to an interview.
For the documentary?
For the documentary.
Okay.
And so we went back and forth on his demands, and I basically saying, John, no, I'm not going to give you confidential information. I'm not going to give you proprietary financial information. It's none of your business.
About yourself?
About the film.
Okay. Why would he want that?
So he could shut it down. So he could go to those people that were giving me money and say, can you cancel the check? So I don't know. I don't know in reality what his motivation is. As one of our interviews in the film says, John told him, the man's name is Scott Darsney to make it easier to tell the story. So Scott Darsney told us that John told him that he had gone to see Greg at an event, and John had said, and it just made me sick, the way people were fawning at him. Dr. Greg, that man's just a nurse from Bozeman. I mean, there's so much belittling disdain.
Yeah.
Reminds me of Trump, Little Marco and Dickie Durbin. I mean, it's schoolyard bullying. And so, but I don't know the motivation behind it. Other people have told me that Krakauer is jealous that Greg's books were selling better than his at the time. I mean, as fate would have it, they actually did publish their books kind of on the same kind of calendar. So John could see that Greg's was, number 1, 2, or 3 in the bestsellers list for 252 weeks. Point is that there could have been professional jealousy there. I don't know. But there seemed to me, just in watching Krakauer's face in this piece and listening to secondhand hearsay stories about him, that there's a lot of disdain, personal disdain for Greg. And that just comes from ego, right? I mean, if you just disdain somebody, it's ego.
You don't think, I guess maybe one of the I'm playing devil's advocate here. One of the things that might be said is that maybe Krakauer wanted it shut down, your documentary shut down, because he realized that Greg was right all along, that it wasn't such a big deal, but Krakauer had made it a big deal. So he didn't want that to come out into the light of day.
I have no idea. I
mean, I'm playing devil's advocate with that, but it sounds like from what you've said that there's probably something that's a little bit more personal there that was going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it could be. But as I say, I will never speak for Krakauer. I will never.
And you'll never know.
And I'll never get into that his head, thankfully. I don't know. It was interesting because, in Krakauer's, when he and I went back and forth with my invitation to be interviewed for the film, he kept, giving me these hammer blows. You must agree that Greg, did this and this and this, and you of course you will. You have to agree that. And I thought, wait a minute, this language is so. Again, the bullying. No, John, that's not what my research showed. That's not what I believe to be true, because I have been there, you haven't. Let's just start with that one. I believe my own research. I trust my own work enough to not let you browbeat me into thinking you have the only vision of this.
I was able to get access to the video. I was able to watch the video because you gave me special access to it. So thank you for that. But when doing some research, I wasn't able to find it anywhere. Is it available for people to watch? And has it had any sort of premiere at a film festival? Because I'm here for Sundance. We're in Salt Lake City right now, and I'm here for Sundance. Has it premiered anywhere, or is it being shown anywhere?
Answer to the first part of the question, yes. The website is 3000cupsoftea.org, and people can buy the DVD or rent the film.
Stream it. Perfect.
So they can watch it online. So that's the first part. The number two answer is no. We have not gotten into one major U.S. film festival and have not gotten into even one B-level film festival in the entire country.
It's a beautiful documentary. It's really well made.
I do not think it's a quality issue. I think it's a political issue. And of course, I'm the filmmaker, so I have to say that. I've shown it to enough people who are professionals in this field, as I am, who have said, Jennifer, no, this is not because it's not a good film. This is because you are poking a very big bear. Two of them. I'm poking CBS, I'm poking 60 Minutes, and I'm poking Jon Krakauer. But
how does that organization and how does that person have sway over whether you get into a film festival or not?
Well, let me tell you a story about that. I suspected that Krakauer and or 60 Minutes were poison pilling the film. And I thought it was probably not 60 Minutes because they're too smart. I mean, they know that without any publicity, it will just die. It will just go away. And if they give it any notice, then it will get to center stage. So they're being, I believe, pretty smart. But I was approached by a film festival in southern Utah that I premiered a film at during their inaugural festival several years ago. And the director called me and said, we'd love to show 3000 Cups of Tea as a one-up, not during the festival, but as a one-up screening that we do throughout this year to keep the community involved. Great. So the minute, and I say the minute, it might have been a few hours, but literally the day that the media, that their press release went out, that 3000 Cups of Tea was showing in St. George, Utah, and that tickets were available, the festival director got an email from Jon Krakauer. So the festival director called me up and said, well, this is happening, and read me the email. And it was the same, very much a chilling, well, if I were you, I'm not sure I'd air this because Jennifer's a fraud and the film is full of lies. And if you cannot, you cannot disagree once you've read my article on this, and you have to, see clear to canceling it once you've heard this interview that I did.
But who cares what he says? That's what I don't understand, the power that he has.
Well, I think there's a very much a chilling effect because the festival in Utah, in southern Utah, had to spend a lot of money to answer him. They had to figure out if they were going to go to their attorney with it. They had to figure out if they're going to hire, special security because he then bought tickets and Greg Mortenson was coming. And so all of this hassle that I think a lot of film festivals are saying, you know what, we don't need it. We just don't need it. We don't need
the controversy.
We don't need the controversy. We don't need to engage our attorneys in this.
It just makes me so sick all over again. And I think, in a lot of respects, like the lid has been blown off of our political situation in the last year and a half. It has for me, at least. Mm-hmm. I have wanted to believe that, that other countries are the ones that are so corrupt. And yes, that power, it's just a bad thing, in a lot of hands, like political power, and I'm talking specifically Washington, D.C., right? So I've had the light bulb turned on for me in the last year and a half in terms of that. And then when I hear stories like this, I realize it's happening all over the place on so many different levels because I believe your documentary. I believe the research that you did. I believe that it's a balanced documentary in terms of saying, you know what, he wasn't perfect. He did some things wrong. He admits to doing some things wrong, and maybe not. It wasn't totally inappropriate. He wasn't stealing money. He wasn't the guy to manage a multi-million-dollar nonprofit. I mean,
Right.
That is the bottom line.
That's the bottom line.
But there was no, the term you used earlier, kind of nefarious. There was nothing nefarious about it.
There's no
There's
There's no missing money.
No, there wasn't. And then to think that someone has that kind of power, or even if let's just say it was CBS behind it, that a company has that kind of power to just shut it down.
Well, and the larger answer is that every story has at least two sides. Krakauer got his side on 60 freaking minutes. This is my side. This is my research. Why is somebody else's research, somebody else's take on a story so threatening? And that's a question for him, not for me.
That is a question. Well, hopefully we can get some more folks listening, the listeners actually out watching and talking about 3,000 cups of tea, because it is fabulous. It really is. So hopefully we can drive some energy around that. What's next for you? You mentioned that you're writing. Are you thinking at all about other documentaries? You're obviously a wonderful journalist, and you're looking at things from a well-rounded perspective. Do you have any other projects?
I do. I am working on my next book, Another Ghost, right now, but again, can't divulge whom it's with. And, we'll see. I mean, I don't know that I have the heart to do another film soup to nuts. This one, I used to say that my first book, Savage Summit, kicked me in the teeth. So I thought I was going to be a one-book wonder, and that was going to be just fine with me. And then the second book came along. I literally stumbled across the second book, and that kind of got me out of that fear. But this film has it's cost me so much. It's cost me friendships. It's cost me relationships, professional relationships. It's cost me financially, professionally. I still suffer a strange, lingering kind of PTSD over the fear I felt of losing it all. I mean, having a lawsuit thrown at me. Because Krakauer, he's very litigious. And we all know a lawsuit does not have to have merit to bankrupt the people involved.
Should I be worried about this podcast?
No. Thankfully, we still have the First Amendment. So,
sometimes.
Yeah. So and in fact, the film has had some criticism because it wasn't tough enough. And I basically said, oh, yeah.
Tough enough on Krakauer?
Yeah, tough enough on Krakauer and CBS. And I said, well, you find the libel attorney and the fair use attorney that will let you put out a film that's anti-60 Minutes. So, yeah, I mean, you can just imagine the lawyers that went through that trying to find something that they could bring a suit for, and they haven't. Knock on some wood.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm sorry to ramble, but it's a very difficult question for me because I loved the process. I loved the research. I loved the interviews. I loved the travel. I loved the adventure. I loved the unearthing of a different story. But it nearly killed me.
You're just not ready to get back on the horse again.
It nearly killed me. Mm-hmm. The times that Jeff came into my office and I was just sobbing over the keyboard were one too many.
Yeah.
And he kept saying, that's it, we're pulling the plug. And I was like, no, we're not.
Too far into it.
Well, not only that, but I'm not a plug puller. I was the last person to finish the Ironman at Lake Placid. I was the last person to come in at the Vermont 50 trail run. I mean, I don't quit. And I'm not saying that all hail Jennifer Jordan. It's just not in my makeup. I should have quit some of these things. I should have said, you know what? This is not doing me any good. This is not. Anyway, I'm very proud of the film. I'm glad I suffered through it.
I am too.
Thank you.
I really am.
but I don't know. I mean, I love working on other people's films. I love story editing. I love getting in and reading through the transcripts and finding the pieces that fit and working in the edit suite. I love all of that. But doing an entire film and having to finance the entire film and worry about every single nickel to a degree of mortgage. I mean, to a degree of, I cashed out my life insurance policy. It was just more difficult than life should be again. maybe it should be that difficult once, but not again.
How's Greg doing?
Remarkable. He really is. He is a survivor. He is a passionate man who hasn't lost an ounce of that passion for the mission, for those girls and boys in these impoverished areas, to bring them education, because he knows that education is the number one tool that we all have, and I mean we Westerners, to fight this growing Islamic threat. That not only on the ground over there, as far as, bringing the children, up through and out of poverty through education, but enabling those children and those parents, a lot of whom were illiterate until Greg showed up, and who now see their kids in school, and they are going to these women's vocational centers that Greg has started. When a child and a devotee of Islam can actually read the Quran for themselves, they can read that it's a book of peace and not a book of war. So that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are diminished in the pool of possible fighters with just that simplest of fact. And I'm not saying every single one of those children will never, but I'm saying the chances are so reduced, incredibly reduced, by them having that education, being able to read the Quran, and as I said earlier, having their American face.
So he's still actively working with the organization?
He is not with the organization anymore.
Okay, and it's Central Asia Institute.
Central Asia Institute.
Okay, we'll just say that.
He parted ways with the Institute in November of 2015, and he is rebuilding and rebranding himself as we speak.
Good.
And I predict we will see him very soon back on a public. I mean, he's come to a couple of events, so it's not like he's not in the public eye, but back in active, working to the mission goal soon.
Another book? Do you know if he's working on another book?
I think he is working on another book. In fact, I kind of chastised him for not hiring me to write the first book because, the one of the problems that they got into in that first book with 60 Minutes and everything else was just one edit that was done without Greg's knowledge. And Greg's fault because, as the author of the book, he should have demanded
He signed off on it,
to read the final galley proof. But there was an error in the timeline.
Oh, okay.
That Greg didn't catch, and that Krakauer did. An error in the timeline. It's like, seriously. Like, because he spent hours there and not a week there, this is the reason to bring a man down. Anyway, the man is not down. In fact, Greg hates the title, The Rise and Ruin of Greg Mortenson, because he's not ruined. But, I'm a person of alliteration, so.
Right. The Rise and Ruin and Rise Again.
Right, The Rise and Ruin and Rise Again. And as I explained to him, they did ruin. They didn't annihilate, but they did ruin an aspect of the mission and of you that can never be rebuilt.
Because he's left the organization.
Because he's left the organization, and because, as I said earlier, this is an epitaph, unfortunately. So in that way, no matter what you do for the rest of your life, this sticks. And there's a ruination in that. I just saw Tanya.
Oh, Tanya, yeah.
Tanya. And I kept thinking, my God, this is the same thing. I mean, I think she probably had a lot more culpability than she wants to own up to. But she certainly wasn't holding the baton, and she certainly didn't direct, the attack on Nancy. But because of the shaming, and the media just never liking her to begin with, and the Ice Skating Federation never, ever wanting her anywhere near their rinks, it just created a narrative, and she was powerless.
Yeah. Boy, we can be mean. And I
We
know
can be
Tara,
so
Greg's
mean.
wife, says something about that we'd love to see people
Taken down. Yep.
And it's, boy, it makes us feel better, doesn't it? Holier than thou.
Right.
Yeah. And
Thank God I didn't build schools in Pakistan. Look what would have happened to me. Right. I mean, it's all that.
It is. I often think there, but for the grace of God, you know, whatever it is, like like you said earlier, it's like we're all imperfect, right? We've all made mistakes. We don't have a perfect history. It could be any of us for anything. And just the way things go viral these days is just really sad.
And, you know, the bottom line is it doesn't matter if it's true anymore. I mean, the Trump administration and Bannon and his cabal have proven that. And, you know, I'm a journalist, and I'm a constitutional democracy person. And to watch our democracy crumbling because we no longer have that constitutional foundation, or we're losing it. We still have it, but we are losing it in leaps and bounds because we've lost our fourth estate as a viable check and balance on the first three. Very dangerous stuff.
Well, as we wrap up here,
Yeah.
This is the Be Bold podcast. You're very bold. Tell me what it means to you to be bold, kind of what that phrase conjures up for you.
For me, being bold means fighting, clawing, elbowing, pushing your way through fear. Because on the other side of fear is bold. For me, I think of what I've done that's bold. And each of them involved gut-wrenching fear. So yeah, it's a combination of trusting that you can do it, trusting / hoping / praying you can do it, and the confidence of knowing that even if you can't, that if you falter or stumble or fail. But again, I'm just thinking of my own examples, and why did I keep running the Vermont 50 when at mile 6 my intestines gave out, and I ran 44 miles.
But that didn't involve fear. That was persistence
you're right.
and fortitude.
Right. That wasn't fear. Yeah, K2 was fear. K2 was blind fear. This film was fear. Jumping off the stratosphere in Las Vegas was fear. Even though I had a harness on. Rock climbing is fear for me because I think I must have fallen off a cliff in an earlier life. Yeah, so for me, being bold is having something in front of you that scares you, silent, speechless, heart racing, and you do it anyway.
I like that.
And it's interesting because I was working on a project that I've since walked away from. And I walked away from it because the woman talked about herself as bold and relentless and fearless. And her examples were just mediocre to me. I said, I can't write a book on mediocrity. This isn't bold to me.
Might have been bold for her.
Right.
But you needed something that more struck the chord with your heart in terms of what bold was.
Right. And her obstacles were not what I consider obstacles. They were, they were difficult. They were that's another word for obstacle, but a little lesser. They were,
speed bump.
Yeah. They were speed bumps. Exactly. They were speed bumps. They were not even hurdles. And so because it just didn't reach the level that I could take my heart and emotion and talent and write her story as heroic, because it just felt like, we kind of all have to do that. This isn't all that rare. So yeah, I mean, That's my definition of bold.
Where can we find you? And where can we find you? You mentioned earlier where we can find the movie and stream it on 3000cupsoftea.org.
Mm-hmm.
And then are you on social media? Can we find you on social media?
I'm on Facebook. I am on Twitter, although I just don't twit. There's just, how many hours in the day?
I have no idea.
And the only reason I Facebook is because I need to keep myself out there. I mean, I work 20 feet from my bed, so I'm not, I need to involve myself on a daily basis in the world. So right now I'm having great fun in writing the Oscar movie reviews.
I noticed that on your Facebook page.
And I'm having great fun with that. So yes, I'm on Facebook. JenniferJordan.net is my website. 3000cupsoftea.org is the film's website. And
we'll find you there.
You'll find me there.
We'll stream and download and post it to our own social media and get the word out to everybody.
Well, and I've never been to Bhutan, so
let
me know when the next trip's going.
I will. It's in the fall.
Oh.
It's actually sold out. But if you're a trekker, I do a big snowman trek occasionally, 25 days. In Bhutan, 18,000 feet is the highest, but it's 18,000 feet, 24 nights in a tent, so no huts. So you've been there.
Been there, done that.
Beautiful, beautiful people.
How many miles a day?
People. 8 to 13 miles a day, so not too bad. And everything's taken care of. Porters and our mutual friends were on that trek with me a couple of years ago, so we'll get you on there eventually.
That's great.
Thanks so much. Thanks for bringing me into your beautiful home here in Salt Lake City.
Thank you.
And the gorgeous snow as it's falling off. The snow and ice are falling off the
we finally have snow. It's been a very dry winter, so
it's beautiful.
You timed it perfectly.
I did. I know. Sundance, yay. So thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Beth.
There are so many aspects to this that are just pretty sad. I still can't fathom the influence that Krakauer has over this story. Jennifer didn't go into some of the details that she had shared with me offline, but I know there were more issues beyond just not being able to get it into film festivals, and she's lost friends, as she said, as a result of this. So it's just, as I said, just really sad. I think one of the biggest points here is that the 60 Minutes program did not present a balanced story. And as she said, they are often agenda-driven. And when you watch her film, it'll make more sense, especially when you see at least one person, and that was Scott Darsney, how he was misquoted by Krakauer. And that was the basis of one of the accusations that was thrown at Greg. So it just doesn't make sense. I guess I could go on, but I really want you to watch the film yourself. So please check it out on 3cupsoftea.org. And as I mentioned in the introduction, if you're interested in hosting a showing of the film, email me at beth@beboldpodcast.com. Please share this episode with anyone whom you think might enjoy it. Probably not John Krakauer. But if you like what you hear, please take a moment to subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And please leave a review, as those really help other people find the podcast. And it just takes a moment for you to leave that review. You can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustandlipstick.com. If you feel like being bold yourself, you can join me on one of our Wander Tours. Right now, I've got some space available on North India in the fall, Africa early next year, and that includes a trek up Kilimanjaro, a Tanzanian safari, and a gorilla trek in Rwanda. We've got space on Papua New Guinea in August, as well as a culinary tour to Santa Fe. You'll find all of those on wandertours.com. If you'd like to connect with me, you can friend me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. And finally, the ladies can join us on our Be Bold Facebook group. We've got about 2,500 members in that group, and it's where we share goals, talk about our setbacks, and where you can find words of encouragement and inspiration from others. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.